In late 1939, the Soviet Union looked at the tiny nation of Finland and saw a country that should have been deleted from the map in less than a week. Stalin sent nearly 500,000 men, thousands of tanks, and a massive air force across the border, fully expecting a victory parade in Helsinki within days. On paper, the Finnish army was a joke. They had almost no tanks, a handful of outdated planes, and a massive shortage of standard rifles. But the Soviets had made one catastrophic mistake. They were about to walk into a frozen trap designed by a self-taught engineering genius named Aimo. While the great powers of Europe were perfecting massive long-range cannons and heavy armor, Lahti had spent a decade obsessing over a weapon the Soviets had actually dismissed as a useless police toy, the submachine gun. This was the birth of the Suomi KP/31, and it contained a mechanical glitch in quality that was so extreme it redefined the limits of infantry warfare. While most weapons of the era were moving toward cheap stamped metal parts to save money, Lahti went in the opposite direction. The Suomi was built like a high-end Swiss watch made of solid milled steel. It was heavy, weighing over 10 pounds, more than a standard infantry rifle, but that weight was a hidden superpower. It made the weapon so stable that a soldier could dump an entire magazine in one burst without the barrel climbing an inch. But the real impossible feature was the vacuum. The Suomi utilized a unique pneumatic valve system in the receiver that acted like a piston, using air pressure to perfectly regulate the bolt's movement. This allowed it to reach a blistering rate of fire of 900 rounds per minute without shaking itself to pieces. It was so precise that each gun was issued with 2 interchangeable barrels that were machined to such tight tolerances they were guaranteed to hit the exact same point of impact at 100 meters. But the most terrifying innovation was the magazine. While everyone else was using 20 or 30-round sticks, the Finns introduced a 71-round drum magazine that turned a single soldier into a walking machine gun nest. When the temperature dropped to -40°C, the Soviet Mosin-Nagant rifles began to freeze solid, their heavy lubricants turning into glue. But the Suomi, built with insane precision and designed for the Arctic, didn't care about the cold. It functioned perfectly in blizzards that killed men where they stood. The Soviets entered the Finnish forests thinking they were fighting a primitive militia, but they were actually walking into the path of a white death delivery system that could erase an entire platoon before they even heard the first shot. The toy that Stalin's generals had laughed at was about to become the most feared sound on the Eastern Front, and the glitch of Finnish perfection was about to turn the snow red. As the Soviet columns stretched for miles along the narrow, snow-choked logging trails of the Raate road, they realized too late that they had walked into a meat grinder designed by a ghost. The Red Army was used to grand, sweeping battles on open plains, but the Finnish Sissi Rangers used a tactic known as mati, the Finnish word for a pile of firewood gathered to be chopped down. They didn't attack the Soviet divisions head-on. Instead, they used their superior mobility on skis to slice the massive columns into small, isolated pockets. Once a Soviet unit was cut off, the glitch of the Suomi KP-31 would begin its terrifying work. In the pitch-black darkness of the Finnish winter, where the sun barely rose, the Soviet soldiers would huddle around campfires just to stay alive. Suddenly, the silence of the forest would be shattered by a sound they had never heard before, a mechanical buzz so fast it sounded like a giant saw cutting through the trees. This was the Suomi's 900 round per minute rate of fire. Because of the weapon's extreme weight and its revolutionary muzzle brake, the gun had almost zero recoil. A Finnish soldier could burst out of the tree line on skis, glide past a Soviet camp at 20 miles per hour, and empty a 71-round drum magazine with laser-like precision before the first Soviet soldier could even reach for his frozen rifle. By the time the Russians returned fire, the Finn was gone, swallowed by the forest and the snow. The Suomi turned the individual soldier into a one-man army. In one famous incident known as the Sausage War, a small group of Finnish soldiers stumbled upon a Soviet encampment where the starving Red Army troops were eating. Within seconds, the Finns utilized the Suomi's massive magazine capacity to delete the entire unit before they could even stand up. The sheer volume of fire was so overwhelming that Soviet survivors began to report being attacked by hundreds of men, when in reality it was often just 2 or 3 Finns with KP-31s. The weapon became a psychological nightmare. The Soviets nicknamed it the woodcutter because of how it would literally shred the bark off trees and the bodies of men in a single sweep. The accuracy was so high that Finnish snipers would sometimes put down their rifles and use the Suomi for mid-range hits, knowing the milled steel barrel wouldn't warp under the heat of continuous fire. This wasn't a battle of numbers, it was a battle of efficiency. On the Raate Road, an entire Soviet division, nearly 15,000 men, was systematically destroyed by a force a fraction of its size. The snow was littered with discarded Soviet equipment and thousands of bodies, a testament to the fact that a junk country with a police toy had found a way to out-engineer a superpower. The Suomi KP-31 didn't just win skirmishes, it created a wall of lead that the Red Army couldn't walk through, turning the Finnish winter into a graveyard and forcing Stalin to realize that his massive army was being held at bay by a piece of wood and steel that refused to jam. The sheer humiliation of the Winter War sent shockwaves all the way back to the Kremlin, forcing Stalin to realize that his massive military machine had a glaring, primitive hole in its doctrine. The Red Army had entered Finland believing that submachine guns were police weapons unworthy of a true soldier, but they left the Finnish forests having been decimated by the Suomi KP-31. Stalin didn't just want the war to end, he wanted the Finnish gun. He ordered his top engineers to capture as many Suomis as possible and tear them apart to find the glitch that made them so lethal. What they discovered was a masterpiece of engineering that was decades ahead of its time. The Soviets were most obsessed with the Suomi's 71-round drum magazine, a complex clockwork-driven feeder that allowed a soldier to suppress an entire squad without reloading. The Soviet response was to stop production of their own failing designs and create a Russian Suomi. This led to the creation of the PPD-40 and eventually the legendary PPSH-41, or the Shpagin. If you look at the iconic Soviet drum magazine that defined the Red Army in World War II, you are looking at a direct, literal copy of Aimo Lahti's Finnish design. The glitch had gone viral. The Soviets took the Finnish concept of high-volume fire and scaled it up to a level the world had never seen. They realized that in the chaos of urban warfare, like the ruins of Stalingrad, a soldier with a 71-round submachine gun was worth 10 men with bolt-action rifles. The Suomi had effectively ended the era of the long-range infantry rifle and ushered in the age of the spray-and-pray submachine gun. But while the Soviets built millions of cheap, stamped metal versions of the gun, they could never replicate the Suomi's Swiss watch soul. The original KP-31 remained the gold standard of the 20th century. It was so well built that the Finnish military kept it in their active inventory all the way until the late 1990s, a 60-year service life for a weapon built in a woodshed. Its influence didn't stop in Russia. The Suomi's bolt-cocking handle and internal gas buffer system can be seen in the design of the Israeli Uzi and even the British Sten gun. It was the weapon that proved that a tiny nation, if they have the best engineering in the world, can make a superpower bleed. The Suomi KP-31 wasn't just a gun, it was a pivot point in history where military leaders finally understood that quality, precision, and a massive magazine could defeat an army 10 times its size. It remains the ultimate glitch weapon, a machine so perfect it forced the entire world to change how they fought.
turning the quiet, frozen forests of Finland into the birthplace of modern close-quarters combat. The White Death wasn't just a man in a snowsuit. It was the mechanical heart of a gun that refused to let a small nation die.